Me Too and a whole lot more.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
So we flipped the schedule a little bit for this evening. As I speak to you, it is about 1 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. Hey, listen, I took a day off. What can I tell you? And so anything that is rocking and rolling with this election that happened past Wednesday early in the afternoon and or the coronavirus and the numbers that we have in the state and national response, we shall catch up sooner than later. But it's a pleasure to have you aboard. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. So I'm kind of treating this as one of our Friday broadcasts, which is where we kind of spread things out. And if we have a terrific guest, it's easy to do, and I do. She is the author of a brand new book that is yet to come out in August. So she'll have a double shot. When it really comes out, she'll come back. Hilary Levey Friedman is the president of the Now chapter here in Rhode Island. But I know her more as an expert on pageants, but more importantly, my go-to person on a lot of socio-political things. She's a professor at Brown. She's a terrific resource for me. Welcome, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words.
The book is about what?
The book is the story of American feminism through the lens of beauty pageants. So that surprises some people.
And by the way, that's a thing you and I have had for a long time here, this conversation about the legitimacy of beauty pageants.
Yes. You don't buy it, you mean?
I don't buy it.
Well,
you know what? That's not true. And now that they went off the swimsuit thing,
well, that's just Miss America, and Miss America is sort of the big one and the one that everybody compares themselves to, especially because it's the longest running one, started in 1921, just a year after women get the right to vote, right, in this country, after the 19th Amendment is ratified, so that's interesting timing. So all of those links are what I do in the book. Why do you think they wear sashes? Comes from the suffragists and what they wore in the parades when women were going out and being more public. So it is important what Miss America does, and it does matter that they got rid of the swimsuit, but there are many other aspects of it that matter quite a bit as well. So when we think about women running for office, we actually have lots of former, in particular, Miss America contestants who have won elected office or who have run for national office, or just a woman who almost became Secretary of State in Kentucky, Heather French, who was Miss America 2000.
Yeah, look, I think now that they've taken the suit thing out of it, that was the swimsuit thing out of it, I think there's, look, let me tell you something. Anything that promotes the ability to public speak, number one, right? How many students do you have right now that can't look at you, that look at you this way? Even at Brown, the interactive one-on-one eye contact communication skills of this generation.
Well, I actually force my students to do presentations because it can be scary. They have to do 5-minute presentations on their
I'm sure
paper,
you don't let them get away with it, but you know you've seen a trend, haven't you, in terms of their lack of interactive skill. You know, a young person now who looks you in the eye and shakes your hand looks impressive to my generation. I never thought I'd be old enough to be able to say, you know, kids today. But kids today.
Well, I don't want to overgeneralize. It's certainly fair to say that people are much more focused on their screens sometimes, which means looking down and not at people or not fully engaging. That's an issue. So whether it's a laptop or an iPad or a phone, that's something to combat.
They're also, you know, borderline narcissists, all of them. So I'm sure, getting back to your point, the professionalism and the rhetorical skills and the thinking process and the talent portion and the standing up for yourself thing, and all, those are the things I think the pageant probably stands best for. So I might turn on this whole thing now, the swimsuit thing. I really haven't thought about it that much, but you think it's all connected, though. You think all of this, all of the politics of the day and women's issues and the progressive movement at the State House and all that stuff for you seems to come out of the same barrel of thought, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, when you think about what is seen as the establishment of second-wave feminism took place outside the 1968 Miss America pageant.
Second-wave feminism.
Right.
What is that?
So that's after women got the right to vote, there was sort of a lull in terms of organization of what are we fighting for, what are we going after, and then it just became very clear in the late 1960s as part of the broader civil rights movement that women were fighting for access to jobs and education and the right to control their own bodies. And so a lot of that happened outside of the Miss America pageant in September 1968. That's the source of the term, some don't like it, bra burners, and that's all from outside the Miss America pageant. And if I take it up to the current day, I mean, when we talk about Me Too, Gretchen Carlson, who sued Roger Ailes at Fox News, she was Miss America 1989. And she's out there fighting now to lift NDAs for women associated with sexual harassment. And after there was a Me Too movement within the Miss America pageant, she's the one that came in then to take it over. And she's responsible for the getting rid of the bathing suits.
Yeah, we should probably talk about some of the challenges that Mike Bloomberg had with the NDAs and Elizabeth Warren kind of pinning that on him. I mean, that was probably the beginning of the end of his $500 million investment in trying to become the president of the United States, or at least the nominee. But you talk about the second wave of feminism here. I'm fascinated by that because, in part, Eric, if you throw the headline up on Chris Matthews, we're going to get to Weinstein in a second, but Chris Matthews, kind of, whenever the professor comes, we're scattered all over the place. But this bothered me in the sense that clearly he has some CAD-like character challenges that he admits to and did in his 2-minute mic drop retirement the other night. But when I talked about it on the radio, I got some interesting interaction from women who were dialing the show saying, oh, come on now. Based on the GQ article that might have just put him out where, I'm sure you read it, where the author who was a contributor to the show a couple of years ago talks about how at makeup, he's looking at her saying, hey, you look beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, we all know those guys. They still exist. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily violent harassers. They behave badly. And what I'm thinking is that nuance anymore seems to have been lost. The pendulum just swings bang. He more or less had to hang up his cleats for that and a bunch of other things that I wonder if the feminists in the early second wave would have even flinched over it. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, it does, but it just shows how far we have come and how far we have yet to go.
Well, maybe how far too far we've gone.
Well, I would say,
a little
first
bit too
of all,
touchy, it seems to me.
An accumulation of things matters too, a pattern of behavior. If we're going to go to Weinstein, just the number of people. But I would also say a lot of this is about power dynamics, and if the person who's making comments to you controls your job or your success or your pay, whatever it is, when there's a power dynamic, that's what makes it even more troubling.
Got it. And that falls into the sexual harassment category that would be, for lack of a better term, traditionally now understood, not traditionally, but the standard of sexual harassment. This particular woman who wrote in GQ was just really no different from what you are to me in this show. I am the host, you are the guest, you're providing information, and if we had powdered together and got our, which we don't, but if we did, and I had said something to you about the way you looked, you would say, shut up. I don't think that you'd go crying and writing a story about it. Now, if I do that to every female guest that comes in, now I'm an idiot, and someone's got to step in and stop me, and if I'm smart enough to react to that and stop behaving like that, let my work flourish is my point. I just think that there is, I'm not saying what he did was, what he's known for is harmless or not something that needs to be addressed or fixed or stopped, but I don't know that you've got to fold a guy's career over that kind of, for lack of a better term, old-fashioned bad guy mouth. Does that make any sense?
Well, it certainly wasn't one thing when it came to the Chris Matthews. People were upset with feeling like he treated Elizabeth Warren differently, and was that because she was a woman? The reference to Nazi Germany when he was talking about Bernie Sanders. So it wasn't just related to the treatment of women.
And he was due to retire soon anyway, I get it, but I don't think we're coming to a common place on this conversation. I just wonder if you understand, when you say we've come so far, we have so far to go, in a couple of lanes I agree, but I also think there should be some exit ramps of common sense here.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Like not to be so doggone touchy.
Well, I would say too, when we think about Chris Matthews or we think about shock jocks on the radio. You might know a few. Part of the thing is to be provocative, and so when we're thinking about certain people, maybe the line is a little bit different, but we don't know what's happening off camera as well, and so we should trust people who are saying this has happened to me off camera.
Well, speaking of off camera and behind the scenes, the Weinstein thing is all about that. When we come back, we'll take a look at that and a whole lot more. Stay with us. So we'll remind you about this fiasco.
Harvey Weinstein was handcuffed and sent immediately to prison after being convicted of rape and sexual assault.
All of my 3 clients should be considered heroes of the women's movement and the victims' rights movement.
It took the jury 5 days to reach a mixed verdict, finding Weinstein not guilty of the most serious charges of predatory sexual assault, which could have brought a life sentence. Weinstein's legal team promised to appeal as they left the courthouse.
Harvey took this in stride better than I think I would have. He was shocked. He couldn't believe it. He just kept saying, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent.
The 67-year-old was accused of raping an actress in a hotel room in March of 2013 and forcibly performing a sex act on another woman in 2006. Day One is a Rhode Island agency organized to deal with issues of sexual assault. They said in a statement Monday that 2 incredibly courageous women can believe that the criminal justice system listened to them and believed them. Today, Harvey Weinstein became a convicted sexual predator and is in jail. Representative Teresa Tanzi first spoke out about her experiences with sexual harassment in the workplace when the Me Too movement started in 2017.
People are really beginning to understand the dynamic that happens in sexual harassment and the power that people have over others and how they abuse that power.
Good morning, everybody.
Weinstein never took to the stand in his own defense, but maintained any sexual conduct with his accusers was consensual. He also faces 4 felony counts of sexual assault in Los Angeles.
All right, laugh out loud about the walker. Anybody who's got a disability, it's not funny business, but he seemed to walk out a lot better than he did walking in, Okay, just in case a juror catches it on television, right? And jurors aren't supposed to see TV. Come on, Harvey. It's like, so he's now what? Is he the standard or is he the high bar? What is he?
Well, something very different happened here than what has happened before, which is that he was found guilty on these charges, and in a way that had not previously occurred.
Right.
So
a jury bought the story.
Right, and so
Well, 2 of the 5 stories, da-da-da-da-da.
But still, that's a victory for women who are concerned about sexual harassment and assault, and again, being someone who has a pattern of abuse. This was a major step forward, the fact that he was convicted, and there are still yet more trials to be had related to him, particularly in California.
He's got to go to California. Since this broke, since we've had a few conversations about this, behavior has changed in the workplace.
We hope.
Has in our workplace. I mean, I never saw a lot of that kind of stuff anyway. If somebody was saying the wrong thing to a woman, I'd be the first one in the business to say, hey, especially the young guys, knock it off. But I had a lot of estrogen in my life. 4 sisters younger than me. I've got a daughter and a wife. I have a little bit of an antenna to that kind of a thing. Do you feel like we've made a major stride here since this case broke 3 years ago?
I think the fact that there has been legal remedy is a major stride.
So this just happening resets recalibrates the conversation.
It does, and I mean, you can say, of course, he was, as you said, he wasn't found guilty of all the charges, but the fact that he was found guilty of any of them shows that we can have, that there will be consequences for those who harass, in this case, and assault women.
So last thing on this, you said before, we've come a long way, we have a long way to go. What is the long way to go?
So this issue of sexual harassment in the workplace is one of those things. So when I talked about second wave feminism before, it was about getting women into medical school and making sure they could work as doctors and all of that. But then we didn't really properly protect them and make sure that those workplaces were safe for them, whether it was for them physically or to have the supports outside of the workplace to make sure that they're successful. So when I say that, I mean, yes, we're fighting for more protections. We're fighting so that it should not be legal for you to sign an NDA based on sexual harassment, and then other things like, we should have affordable childcare and support women in that way.
We didn't put any production up for this, but since you mentioned the NDA, meaning I don't have any headlines or video on this, but it doesn't take a real pull of your memory to remember only a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, when Elizabeth Warren, in the first debate with Michael Bloomberg, nailed him on his NDA problem. It turns out there are 3 stories, he says, that required non-disclosure agreements. That's what that NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And Warren was pressing him to release those women from those NDAs. And to his credit, next day he acquiesced. She didn't think it was enough. She put a full court press on his chest, and I wonder whether that had an impact, in addition to an overall not so great debate performance.
Right.
I wonder if that had an impact in him falling short of what his expectations were.
Well, I think
before he got out of the race yesterday.
I mean, definitely that particular debate performance was probably not his best, and it started out with Warren going after him about the NDAs. So I think that set the tone in a particularly hard way that it was difficult to recover from in that debate, and perhaps for the entire campaign.
I mean, I get why you had an NDA, though. I mean, these are things that happen in business all the time, and it's not necessarily tied to sexual harassment. When you
Right.
separate from an organization, and there's conflict, and you're being compensated because of your separation, it only makes sense for the payer to want protection.
But there's also, he was saying that both sides had agreed that they wanted to have an NDA, and then it came out that people were asking to be released. And certainly, this is, again, Gretchen Carlson, who slightly
Well, there's a-
predated
I
the
get- I
Me Too,
get that-
she's fighting
yeah, I
for
get-
that to be released from her NDA.
Right, I guess there's a way to spin it. And this is where the power and the authority and the influence come. If the payment is tied to the non-disclosure, then he who is paying might suggest that you want the non-disclosure, i.e. de facto, you want the payment. You know, when people, women or men or anybody who is a recipient of a payment on a non-disclosure agreement, later get to disclose that which they were paid for, the question becomes, does the compensation get returned with it? No, right? So there's a contractual consideration that goes on with these things. In the new age, perhaps women won't agree to non-disclosures and not necessarily get paid to go away. They can lawyer up and sue until
Well, to tie,
choke, right?
Well, to tie this up to what we started this segment with, if you felt like you never had a legal remedy to what happened to you and that you were not going to be believed and there was going to be no other way to feel that you were going to get justice.
Meaning there is an end game on the other side. There's another road you can take, and now
Right.
it may come out well for you.
Right. I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but now there is another path.
Yeah. All right.
If our tendency is to say we believe women or whoever is saying that they were being harassed or abused.
Politics of the day. It's a busy week. Next. Yeah, I hate this one. I hate this one. I mean, with a passion, I hate this one. And as a feminist academician, a head of the National Organization for Women here, and perhaps, ironically, for maybe you out there to know, one of the most reasonable people I know,
Thank you.
you can't tell me you support this governor for a day girls only thing for like the 7th straight year. I mean, I get it the first year. I get it's Women's Month. I get all of that kind of a thing. And I don't want to be patronizing about that. But heaven's sake, what message are we sending to boys? You have one?
Two. I have
Two.
Right.
I couldn't
Right.
remember if it was a boy and a girl. I met one of them at a Brown game. He was into the game. But I think he wanted snacks. I think that's what...
The snack is definitely the draw.
snack was
I
the,
can't
was
lie.
the draw. But come on.
So look, we've
Talk
only,
to me about this. I mean, enough is enough with the message. Oh, I'm trying to empower women. I'm the first woman governor, woman governor, da-da-da, blah-blah. You know, there's a lot of guys out there. Where's the commensurate, challenge? Does the Speaker of the House do a Speaker of the Day thing because he's a guy? It's just not smart. What, come on.
Well, look, this is...
By the way, don't women want to compete with men in the workplace? And isn't it kind of oxymoronic and antithetical to suggest that we ought to compete amongst ourselves in a statewide competition to become governor for the day?
Well, I have a few thoughts on this.
I knew you
So, let me start with this, though, because it reminds me of what people say about the Supreme Court, and there's lots going on in the Supreme Court right now. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, when asked, when will you be satisfied about the number of women on the court? And her famous line is, when there are 9. Because, of course, for the vast majority of the time that the Supreme Court has been in existence, it was all men. And so in this case, right, this Governor Raimondo is our first ever female governor. I can't name off the top of my head exactly how many governors we've had in the state of Rhode Island, even from before we were the United States of America, but none of them were women. And so I do think celebrating that is a good thing. March is Women's History Month. Well, let me just say this too, though.
And even a year, or maybe 2, but at some juncture, you know what? Let's make this a, all-comers little grammar school kid contest, and not send a message to boys that, guess what? I got the power now, and you can't compete.
Well, here's the thing, too, is that I would have been one of those people writing the essay every year. That might shock you.
I'm sure
I
you
know. But
and really not happy if you didn't win either.
Probably.
Yes.
So, but I went to an all-girls school for 8 years, and I say this to people all the time. Because I went to a school where a woman was the valedictorian, the sports star, the class president, all of those things, I have literally never doubted that a woman was capable of doing those things. But if you're in an environment where that's not true and you don't have as many examples, you don't have you don't have someone to look up to and say, I could do that, that's consequential.
Then pick a girl and pick a boy.
Or you might have just given Speaker Mattiello a good idea.
No,
he could have a speaker of the day.
I mean, come on. Anyway,
Speaking of which, we've never had a woman Speaker of the House. So,
well, you know what? We may have a new Speaker of the House sooner or later based on what's going on in the grand jury. We'll see what happens with that. Governor Raimondo endorsed Bloomberg, then switched to Biden. As a now person, thought on that at all? Moved by that decision?
Well, the National Now PAC officially endorsed Elizabeth Warren earlier this week. Me, Hilary Levey Friedman.
By the time people are seeing the show, she could be out. I don't know.
Right. Me, Hilary Levey Friedman, I support anyone who runs on the Democratic ticket to unseat your favorite, President Trump.
Your favorite and mine. You have a legislative package up there. I got a minute. What's going on on Smith Hill?
We do. So there's a lot of things going on that Rhode Island now is involved with that people might not be aware of. So one of our big issues this year is gun violence prevention. Gun violence is absolutely a feminist issue, especially when you look at domestic violence rates. It's very important that we ban high-capacity magazines in the state to protect everyone, but especially women. Second of all, we're very supportive of the passage of the Uniform Parentage Act this year, which it's a law in the books. It's been there. It's older than I am. Only 2 other states, Kentucky and Mississippi, have laws as old as this that only recognizes a father as the main person, and we have all sorts of families and ways to have families, and we need to treat children equally under the law.
I think we have to dig into that one a little bit deeper. I think it deserves a longer conversation. We'll have you back soon, I hope. And the book comes out in August?
Me too, August 25th. You can look on Amazon, your independent bookstore, Barnes & Noble. Here she is, The Tarnished Reign of the Beauty Pageant in America. Had to get that in.
Got it. Thank you, my friend. Final word and we come back. Note, the Commissioner of Education will join us on Monday of next week. She's got a lot going on, hired a new superintendent in the city of Providence, and she probably has some thoughts on the same things that Hilary Friedman did. So I'm looking forward to meeting with her. Have a great night. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.